joining us to discuss the situation in Brazil further is Lorena Barberia. She is a professor of political science at the University of Sao Paulo. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, let's dive right into this. We all saw those dramatic scenes unfolding in real time. Professor, this was not an impromptu protest that boiled over. It took careful planning. We heard that from our correspondent. People bussed in, call-outs on social media. Who is behind all this, funding the operations, and why weren't the security better prepared?
So this is really important and very distinct for those who are watching us from abroad, because unlike what we saw in the January 6th riots in the United States during Joe Biden and his assumption to power, in Brasilia, the federal district is controlled by the opposition, by a governor that is aligned with Jair Bolsonaro and who appointed his former chief of police of security as the head of security in the city. And so as the transition has been taking place, the Jair Bolsonaro former police chief, who was responsible and who led a lot of inspections of busing that delayed election voting in the second round elections, was the same security chief that was in charge of security in Brasilia. And this led to a lot of turmoil as encampments were mounted around the city of Brasilia by the opposition, contesting the transition to power and contesting the naming of ministers and the beginning of government by the transition team. So this happened for reasons that are very important to underscore. There's evidence that elected officials, public and military officials that hold offices and have political offices were involved in the planning and in minimizing the threat that this would happen.
I'm so glad you brought up this key distinction, because so many people have been saying, this is just exactly like what happened in January 6th riots here in Washington, D.C. Now, people are, though, also putting the blame in part on former president, in your case, Brazil's case, Jair Bolsonaro, for not speaking out sooner to call down the protesters. It took him about 6 hours, I believe, before he put out his first tweet. Would it have made a difference, would you say, had Bolsonaro acted earlier on?
No, because neither in his statements nor in many of the governors who supported Bolsonaro in his re-election bid, they have moved away from recognizing this as a terrorist act and minimized the violence that was committed. So it's very important, and that's why as well, there's a lot of room for concern at this moment. President Lula has called for governors to come to Brasilia to convene and to send a united message as a force against terrorism. And some of the governors have already expressed reluctance to join Lula in Brasilia to take a political stand against terrorism. So while there's some statements made by Bolsonaro and his allies regretting the vandalism that was taking place, they're being very careful to not use the word and recognize this as terrorism. And this is really important in the signal it sends to protesters and to their supporters.
And moving away from this, this incident itself, it really does come down to the politics of this. It traces back all the way to the election. And many Brazilians we seem to have spoken to before said they really didn't want either Bolsonaro or Lula to run for presidency, but Lula seemed to be the lesser of two evils. How strong is President Lula's position now, starting his presidency on this note?
So I think that this is really critical in this moment. The way that Lula is handling this event is strengthening his ability to bring together those who are kind of in the middle and who are maybe reluctant about the threats that had been expressed about the concerns of a move towards authoritarianism in Brazil with the extreme right-wing governing. I think now with this evidence and with these dramatic events, there's a lot more support for understanding that institutions need to be strengthened, terrorist legislation needs to be re-examined, how what the role of the police and the military in supporting during these types of operations needs to be very, very transparently investigated and discussed with the population and there needs to be prosecutions. There was already, we have precedents, but I think right now, Lula is in a much stronger position because of what happened yesterday.
Lorena Barberia is a professor of political science at the University of Sao Paulo. We thank you so much for your important insight into political chaos in Brazil.